Hi, I'm Doris Purchase, and welcome to Beyond the Frame, a podcast created just for you by Propeller Art Gallery, artists empowering artists in Toronto. Together, we'll take a deep dive into the hearts and minds of working visual artists today and their practice. In each episode, you will hear illuminating and intimate explorations of all things art, and you'll hear it in the artist's own voice. We'll talk process, inspiration, challenges, and much more. Everything you've ever wanted to know about art making or about the artists themselves happens right here. So let's sit back and have a listen, shall we? Today we welcome Elizabeth Greisman. Which ism is it? Under which ism would you classify your work?
So my work has been done over the last 20 years when I became a visual artist. So this was a later career for me, and I'm going to talk a bit about that later on. So I came to this career with a solid background in art history, and what drew me to different sources was really a love of abstract expressionism, the colors of Fauvism, the lightness of Fauvism, Impressionism, and also I'm looking for an ism that bridges disciplines together. For instance, dance and visual arts, and opera and visual arts, and science and visual arts, and poetry and visual arts. All I can get is collectivism, and I don't even know if that's correct. I coined a new phrase, interdisciplinarianism, for you. Really, I have played with a lot of different styles as I've developed my career, and the strongest influences on me are landscape, so landscape architecture, dance, music, and literature and science, and also cooking. So you can see that it's quite diverse. And every time an interest has been interjected into my work, the work has swayed and moved in some direction. And I'm finding it hard to typecast myself because of that. I would say most strongly, I work from a source which is not always visual art. And everything is collected, and I like the idea of being disciplined in a series, and I'll talk about that later.
Who's your muse? Influencers, educators, mentors, who has greatly inspired you?
Well, there's a number of muses. I had a hard time with this question. I would say that the first muse is my painting teacher, Ray Johnson, who sadly passed away. And she was my very, very first painting teacher about 20 years ago. And she recognized that I was a visual artist. I thought up until that time I was a visual artist, but I was primarily an educator. And with Ray, I took a full week to learn how to paint landscape. And it really was groundbreaking for me. Just the freedom, getting away from the household and the family responsibilities and just concentrating on art. I had never allowed myself to do it. And it was like she opened Pandora's box, because once I started, I couldn't stop. And my career began to develop very quickly. So within a year, I had my first show, which Ray attended, and that was at U of T at Victoria College. And then the next year after that, I got my first residency at the Banff Centre. So Ray wasn't there, but that's actually where I started doing portraits and landscape which is something that was going to be a cornerstone of my work. The next person is a lady called Judith Juring, and she was an American living in Paris. And when I was in dance school in London, I attended the Laban School, which is now called Trinity Laban Conservatoire. And Judy was kind of the mother, not kind of, she was the mother of a good friend of mine, and I spent a tremendous amount of time with her when I would go from London to Paris as a house guest. So I was very, very fortunate. And she was an American decorator, and she worked with reclaimed architectural things like staircases and statues and stonework. And I went to the yards with her, and I was fascinated. And also she was involved with different kinds of Provençal fabrics and fabrics from London. And she was also a superb cook. And on the street that she lived, there was a Parisian market that was there every Monday and every Thursday. And I would go with her, and we'd pick out all sorts of things, and then we'd go back and cook. And she was the model, really the model for what I ended up doing in my life, which is kind of incredible. And I was 22 years old at this time and very impressionable. And she had tremendous style. She entertained the American expats. She showed me Paris and kind of gave me that very sophisticated and broad aesthetic training that I was looking for in other areas. And the next person is my art teacher in high school, Marjorie Moser, who really taught me a lot of the skills that I have right now, and definitely taught me how to be an art teacher. So she was hugely influential, and she's at the Women's Art Association. The person after that is a lady called Pat Donlan, who was the director at the Tyrone Guthrie Centre in Ireland. When I attended my first residency there, I met Pat at the door, and we became great friends. And she is one of the reasons I have an international career. So I showed Pat my work, and we chatted, and I got to know her and her husband and their cats. And after a time, I said to her, "Do you think you could write me a reference letter for the Canadian Embassy in Dublin, because I'm going to go there and meet the cultural attaché, and I'd like them to know that I'm coming from your residency." So she wrote this tremendous letter. I visited the Canadian Embassy in Dublin, and the long and the short of it is that I said to them, may I be included in a group show? And in October of that year, they called me from Dublin and asked me to apply for a solo show. And that's how I had my first international show at the Canadian Embassy. And it was called Resonances at the Tyrone Guthrie Centre, and Pat organized a dinner, and it was pretty amazing. And I spoke in front of all the guests and the ambassadors, and I started coming out of my shell. Haha. Doesn't sound like I have much of a shell, but it was like something that was kind of brewing that I never in a million years dreamt would happen. And in that show, I showed small paintings from the Tyrone Guthrie Centre, large drawings on paper, some of my hand-painted wedding gowns, and it was the turning point in my life for sure, because that gave me the background to apply for other things. And the next thing that was hugely influencing on me was the Trinity Laban Conservatoire, but known at the time that I attended Laban School of Dance. And this was really my first time outside of Canada at a dance, at anything other than a trip. And I got to live in London, and I fell totally in love with it. And I fell in love with the dance world. I realized at that time that I was not a dancer. And that was very hard because I was with professionals. So what I realized is that I was interested in scenography and costuming. And that later on, when I went back to school and went to school at Central St. Martin's in the summer, I took a course called Draw the Dancer, and that is why I draw dancers and opera singers now. And also, because I have the background, I understand the moves. The other thing that's hugely influential is the gardens at Spadina Museum here in Toronto. So I also studied landscape architecture and majored in horticulture, and I apprenticed in the gardens at Spadina for 10 years, actually, learning how to be a gardener. And my friend and I were lucky to be able to co-found the first children's summer camp there called Spadina Studio. And we did that for several years. And I believe in better times they are continuing the camp there. And then I had another friend who said to me, why don't we approach Spadina and see if they'll allow us to start Nuit Blanche on the site? So I did. I approached them, and because they knew me, they allowed me to start the Nuit Blanche there in 2008, and I continued there as the director and curator of the show for 5 years, and then was a participant. Tapestry Opera, very influential to me in Toronto because they allowed me to sketch the operas and really get a foot into the world of music. And another thing hugely influential to me is cooking for the residencies that I've been involved in.
Materials matter. What are your chosen favorite tools and preferred medium?
That's actually an interesting question because a lot of my materials have to do with traveling to residencies. For many, many years, other than this year with COVID, I've had to compress a lot of my really serious work into summer residencies or school holiday residencies. And so I developed a technique of packing approximately 24 yards of canvas, gessoed canvas, in a ski bag and carrying that with me. That was pretty well the right amount to take. And then I would cut it into long pieces once I arrived. So it was either gessoed canvas or, if I could afford it, gessoed linen, prepared watercolor paper, which was taken in a tube and would be given a wash with acrylic paint to seal it, or perhaps a see-through medium. I've been working with water-based oil paint mostly this year because my studio is water-based media or water-based gouache or anything that's water-based. My medium of preference when I am not in the studio is oil paint by far. I don't mind gouache. I will also work with colored inks. I do that a lot here in the studio. Water crayons to draw with. When I've been really, really fortunate to be allowed to go into the dance studio and draw the dancers, I'll come in with prepared paper and I'll work with water crayons and generally not alter them afterwards. I used to work with a roll of canvas on the floor and kind of unroll it like a scroll and do a little bit that way, and that would be done with just one color of paint because I was really aware that I couldn't get things on the floor. One situation was with the Birkeland Ballet in Vermont, and I was their guest for a number of summers, sort of visiting visual artist, and they gave me the red carpet, and they allowed me to put my canvas and paper up on the wall and put, obviously, tarps on the floor, and paint and draw while the dancers were working, so it was interactive, and they could see what I was doing, and then I would explain why I did what I did, and I'd get them more in perspective, and I was able to develop a series that way. I'm also really interested in drawing on wedding gowns and making them into art pieces. I've been doing that for a number of years, and I've been ably assisted by a place called the Brides Project in Toronto. Helen Sweet has kindly donated many silk gowns to me, and these were also taken to residencies, and I don't know if you know that you can take your wedding gown on board for free. So I was a recurring bride going over on Air Canada with my wedding gowns to actually decorate them during a residency. And I also like working on silk and velvet. I will work on smaller panels when I'm traveling too, 6x6, and anything up from there that will fit in the suitcase.
Slump secrets. What methods do you employ to get yourself out of a slump?
Well, I think I don't call it a slump. I think there's always a time of reflection. Once a show is up, I rarely start creating a new body of work because I'm thinking of the show. And usually afterwards, there's kind of a coming down period. And I think that's natural, and you have to allow for that. It's the same thing with a residency. But I believe very much in keeping to a schedule and having goals. And that's how I run my whole art practice. Also, I have regular naps. I read cookbooks. A favorite thing to do is to go in France or abroad, to go to a brocante, which is a flea market, or a vide-grenier, which is translated as an attic sale. And here in Toronto, to the Salvation Army, because I love to go through things. I go to fabric stores. Practically, I will paint backgrounds to things. Rather than the painting itself, I'll just get the background paint, color paint on the canvas. I will go to a museum with a sketchbook, and I'll sketch layouts rather than the actual piece itself. And I will also go to see different color palettes. There's a place in France called Le Maître de Mistra. Mistra? I hope I'm saying that right. They've been manufacturing linens for over 100 years, and they have the most exquisite colors and patterns of linen. And when I go back to France, it's going to be one of the places that I visit. It's outside of Paris, and I'm looking to be inspired by all of their colors. The other thing I'll do is I'll work on an application for something. I work on applications all the time. I would say my track record this year has not been as great as I would like it to be. I just keep firing off those applications for different grants and different residencies, and just keep trying. I'll call a friend, and most importantly, not destroy the work in progress. I remember having a visiting professor come to the Vermont Studio Center one summer, and they did not really like what I was doing in the studio. And when they left, I took a can of white paint and a big brush, and I started obliterating all of my work. And my neighbor came in about 10 minutes later and said, "What are you doing?" And she took the can from me and threw me out of the studio. And it was a lucky thing that she did. So I did learn a very, very valuable lesson then. Don't touch your work when you're not in a good frame of mind.
In the beginning. So tell me a bit about your process. Do you have a bag of tricks, lucky talismans, or habits? Where do you start? And more importantly, when do you stop?
I really don't have a bag of tricks, but people who know me well know I'm a collector. It could be called a very bad habit. I'm constantly collecting things which inspire me. Old pieces of china, fabric, silver, linen, sculpture, really anything that is odd and unique, and I'm surrounded by it. So my apartment is very, very full of things. It's got artwork from the ground up. There's really, for people who like the minimal look, this is the maximum look. And I can't stop myself from getting things which move me. And that is definitely one of the secrets that I have. I wouldn't call it a bag of tricks. There's no formula to what I do. I should say that I do not do a drawing ahead of time before I start to work on the canvas. It's all direct. So, for instance, I remember when I was in my last residency, which is December 2019 in Buenos Aires, at a place called Brota. And I was walking with the director, my friend Patricia Miani, and we were strolling in the botanical gardens, and it was raining. And I saw the petals of the jacaranda tree, which were this luscious color of purple, on the red clay gravel walkway. I took a lot of photographs of that, and then I started painting with those colors in mind, and that was the inspiration. But I have to say, I never work from a photograph to recreate things. It's kind of like an inspiration more than anything else, and then I go with it, and I think that's why my work is more abstract.
Calling all emo. What do you wish people to think or feel when they contemplate your work?
I wish people to be transported, if with any luck, to where the work was created, to the inspiration of the work. I wish them to see a mood, an impression. I would like it to make them happy. Well, the truth is that I don't create the work for other people. So I don't know. I think that's probably more honest. I hope when they see the work, it gives them gratification. It's a way of beautification. But I don't know if I'm using art to communicate with people. For instance, if I'm in a dance studio and I'm all set up to draw the dancers, and I've got my tables, or I'm on the wall, or I'm on the floor, or whatever, when the dancers start, I am with the dancers. I won't say I'm in their bodies, because that sounds a bit creepy, but I'm with the movement. I'm with the gesture. I'm with the form. I'm with the music. I'm with everything that's going on the stage or in the practice room. And I'm drawing, and I'm not thinking about how it will be received. There's no tricks in my work. I know, obviously, about complementary colors and things like that, but everything is from my inspiration, from my gut.
The struggle is real. Talk to me about your biggest challenges as an artist. What methods do you use to overcome these challenges?
Well, I would say the biggest challenge is the time crunch. If I'm working, if I'm teaching, or looking after household things, or cooking, or going shopping, there's always a push-pull. Should I be in the studio? Should I be teaching? Should I be, when I'm in a residency, should I be in a museum? Should I be in the studio? There's always a conflict going on. Should I be visiting with friends? Should I be chatting on the phone? Should I be mixing paint? Should I cut this dialogue shorter when I'm talking to someone? I also do volunteer work. How am I going to schedule that in? So I make lists for myself of things that have to be accomplished. If I know I have to bake muffins that day, that goes on the list. I also will work very, very late at night. That's another way I handle things. I'll start baking if someone's expecting something from me at 10 o'clock at night. I won't worry about cleaning up or keeping things tidy. I'll just go for it. It's like going for it full out. It's very, very much of a discipline for me. And that's the challenge, because I've got so many irons in the fire. I would say that I have to make myself concentrate sometimes.
Picture perfect. In your opinion, what constitutes a perfect piece of art? And what qualities in your own work would you signify as a perfect work? For example, perfect composition, confident brushstrokes illustrating a concept, or something else altogether?
Wow. That's a hard question to answer. That's another really hard one. First of all, I've never considered that anything I've done is perfect. That's the first thing. So I would have to argue, in a sense, with this question. I think what constitutes a perfect piece of art, to me, is working in a series of art. So I may have a series of paintings all the same size. For instance, I'm working 36 by 36 right now. So that there's some discipline and there's a logical way to display it as well. And I will put a different mood on every canvas. It's whatever the spirit is moving me. And I think that the longer that I work as a painter, the cleaner my brushstrokes are getting, the better I am technically. But I'm too close to my work to think that it's perfect. And solving an issue, sometimes I'll work on a painting I think is absolutely horrible. And one of the techniques I use is I take a photograph of it. And I walk away and look at the photograph, and for some reason I can get a better sense from looking at the photograph of what I need to do. Sometimes simple is best. Sometimes I turn it upside down and work that way. For instance, the long banner I just did for International Women's Day, literally I took it and turned it upside down, and then I'll work maybe in one color over that to solidify it. That I guess that would be considered a technique. I try not to overwork things. I try and work through a theme. I've done dot paintings. I've been doing flower paintings. I'll probably go back into architectural paintings. I love doing portraits of people. I love the interaction, again, with the person who's sitting for me. And if they're happy with what I'm doing, I'm happy. I can look at some of the portraits and think, this is really masterful. I'll look at it and I'll say, wow, this one's really missing the boat, but this part in the painting is good. I try and find something good in everything that I do. And I've gone through purges of work, several purges in my career, where I kept only what I thought was the best. But I'm not doing that anymore. I'm trying to keep everything and make use of it.
Art Speak. How do you feel about titling, discussing, and explaining your work?
Titling I generally have fun with. I like to write, and I like to write poetry, and right now I'm writing recipes. So I like to play with words. So titling is not a problem. The titles can be very, very fanciful. When I'm feeling that there are certain more rigid expectations of me about if people are expecting paintings of a certain area, let's say, a bay or a site, I'll usually include the work of the site in it. I might say water lilies at Tyrone Guthrie or something like that. But very often the titles are fun. Or I can swing completely the other way. Red dot 1, red dot 2, red dot 3, etc., etc. Chair and courtyard. It depends on my mood, and also it will depend on how much time I have to title the work before it goes into a show. If I really have a lot of time, I might ask one of my friends who's a poet or a writer to help with titles. But anyway, that's fun. I don't have a problem discussing or explaining my work. I think almost 40 years of teaching and administrating has helped me with that. But I'm not good at art speak. I have to speak from the heart. And I understand how words frame art, and I understand that certain ways of looking at things are more popular. I'm just who I am. And that comes out in the way I describe my work.
Heavy metal or classical? What do you listen to while you work? Or is silence your thing?
I have a record player here in the studio, and I have stacks and stacks of folk music from the 70s and rock music from the 70s and jazz and classical music, and that's really a mix. I also like female vocalists. I like show music. I like music of all kinds, but generally I like music that I can sing along to.
Why for art, though? Why do you make art?
Well, I decided to start making art as a career about 20 years ago, and I was having a life epiphany. And I make art because I need to express myself. But art I think, is in everything that I'm doing. It's in the way that I'm cooking, the way that I'm painting, the way I'm gardening, the way I would design a garden, the way I dress, the way I pick out odd things from jumble sales. I make art because that's who I am. But I'm a three-pronged person. I'm an artist, an educator, and an administrator. And that is a very unusual combination, I believe. And I'm almost equally confident in all of those areas. So, for administration, it's creative thinking and logic and putting together proposals. It's the same thing I use in my art practice. Being an educator is communicating with my students or getting them inspired to do things. That's the giving part of who I am. And I really, really love teaching and always have. And then being in the studio, one of the issues I find with being in visual arts is the solitariness of it. And I can't be solitary for too long, which is why I like collaborations. And I should mention also that I've been working for a number of years with Dr. Wendy Wilbesser in Kingston, and we have an art science collective. And we've done many projects together with science and medicine and visual arts. And this is what I find really, really inspiring, is, going to meet people on residencies, having the opportunity to meet people and form partnerships that have lasted for most of my artistic career. And they've taken me in all different directions. I've had the good fortune to work with the poet Mary Dorsey in Ireland, who's a good friend, and my friend Juliette Bresson, who's a physician and author in Dublin as well, and she has my work up in her medical clinic, and it's great for the patients there. And I've had so many fortunate things happen that were collaborative, that I would say you're looking at the whole person here. But my view is very, very big. I'm looking at the globe as I see it, and where I have had the opportunities to travel and live and make these relationships. I'm always looking for interesting opportunities to work with people and other disciplines and to be inspired. I make art because that's how I breathe.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Beyond the Frame, a PAG podcast. To hear more episodes and to view the artist's works, please visit www.propellerartgallery.ca. Hosted by Doris Purchase, produced by Tracy Thomson, and recorded at the Orange Lounge Studio in Toronto. Also, the Propeller Art Gallery recognizes the presence of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Huron-Wendat nations. We acknowledge we are hosted on land governed by Treaty 13, the Toronto Purchase, the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, and the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. We are committed to peaceably sharing and caring for the resources around the Great Lakes and operating the gallery on the principles of inclusiveness as we continue to exhibit art created by artists from all over the world. Thank you for listening.